Hi everyone, nice to see you again. Hopefully our understanding of Japanese pitch accent is a little bit more sophisticated now than it was at the beginning of this series of videos. Not necessarily in terms of the details of how pitch accent works, but in terms of our understanding of what it's for and what role it plays in Japanese as a whole. I acknowledge that there's a certain amount of speculation in these videos. I acknowledge that I don't have all the answers, but this is my best attempt to share what insights I have with you. On the basis of my own experience, I would say this to you. Even if you're relatively good at picking out the more general intonation patterns of Japanese as a whole, the chances are that your brain is not going to be very good at figuring out which pitch accent pattern specifically is used with which word. You'll get some of it right, but there'll be a lot of it in your head that just hasn't gone in correctly in the first place. Even people who speak languages natively that actually use pitch phonemically or lexically, remember we were talking about this in an earlier video, are going to have problems picking up Japanese pitch accent. I don't believe for a moment that Chinese people naturally pick it up just because their language naturally uses pitch phonemically. It's a different system, it works differently, has a different role within the language. So, all of that out of the way, how should you proceed? The first thing you should do, in my opinion, is go through Dogen's pitch accent course. I'm not sure where it is at the moment, it's probably still on Patreon. By the way, I don't know Dogen, and he's not paying me to say any of this. I recommend that you do his course simply because it's the single best resource out there that I'm aware of. If there's a better resource available for English speakers, then I don't know what it is. In the rest of this video, I'm just going to explain briefly what I would take my pitch accent priorities to be if I were learning Japanese again from scratch. I don't spend very much time these days actively working on my Japanese, but to the extent that I do make an effort with pitch accent. I do look things up in a pitch accent dictionary when I'm not sure which pitch accent pattern they use, and I try to commit some of this stuff to memory. And it does have an effect. You will start to speak more accurately. So there are 4 main objectives, 4 primary objectives, and 4 secondary objectives that you can concern yourself with when you're a bit more confident with this stuff. Before I say anything else, I just want to remind you that the more commonly used a word is in Japanese, the more important it is to pronounce it correctly. Some very obscure word that's used once in a blue moon, it's not going to matter that much whether you pronounce it absolutely correctly or not. But if a word is used virtually every time you open your mouth, then you want to be able to pronounce it correctly, right? Okay. Main objective number 1 is as follows. When you're dealing with a Japanese word of 1, 2, or 3 syllables, when I say a Japanese word, I don't mean a Chinese loan word. I'm not talking about a Jukugo, I'm talking about Yamato Kotoba, right? Native Japanese words. When you're trying to learn or memorize commonly used 1, 2, or 3 syllable Japanese words, try and learn their pitch accent patterns. We're going to look at some examples of what I'm talking about here. Kore, sore. These demonstratives have a heiban pitch accent pattern. Don't say kore, sore, that sounds bad. Question words in Japanese, there may be exceptions, but I can't think of any. They are atamadaka, nani, doko, dare, doshite. Then you're going to start getting into common nouns. Umi, sea, we've already looked at that one, right? Yama, kawa, these are heiban. You're going to get parts of the body like ude, ashi, that are odaka. Ude ga itai, ashi ga itai. This one's a bit tricky to get the hang of. It doesn't come very naturally. Then you're going to have words like ki. Now what am I saying? Ki ga takai. Ki as in tree is odaka. Ki ga. You can hear the drop between the ki and the ga. Ki ga takai. But ki as in spirit doesn't work like that. Ki ga susumanai, for example. Ki ga hayai. Then you get pronouns. Kare, kanojo. These words aren't used that much in Japanese, but you should understand that they are atamadaka. Don't say kare, kanojo. That doesn't sound right. Then you get pronouns. Watashi, boku, ore. And you get things like haha, mother, your own mother that is. Chichi is a bit of an exception. It seems to have different pitch accent patterns that are acceptable. Chichi, chichi. You will speak Japanese much more accurately if you memorize these pitch accent patterns as you go along. These are all very common words, very common words. There's nothing exotic here, right? Main objective number 2 is to understand pitch accent patterns for English loanwords. Most English loanwords seem to be atamadaka. They start high and come down immediately, as in keiki. It's not keiki. Cake is keiki. It's good to pronounce these things accurately. Yes, there are lots of exceptions, so you'll have to learn them as you go along. But if you're not sure, then pronouncing these words as atamadaka is a good start. Most two-character jukugo, that means compounds, right? Compound words that basically use the Chinese readings of the characters in question. Most of those words are heiban. So my advice to you is to make a mental list as you go along in your studies of Japanese of all the two-character jukugo that are not heiban. Most obviously they're going to be atamadaka, gengo, igai, inai, ijou, ika, tairyoku, gainen, fudan, kondo, jikai, konkai, zenkai, mirai, kyonen, chugoku, kankoku, kyushu, honshu, kazan, fujisan, denshi, ryori, baka, kyoto, buki, heiki. None of these words is particularly exotic, and it would be great to be able to pronounce them correctly. I'm pretty sure that when I used to speak Japanese back in the day, I would have said Chugoku for China. And this one's confusing because the language is Chugokugo, but the country by itself is Chugoku. There are lots of wrinkles in this system. Never said it was easy. The fourth and final recommendation here in terms of your main objectives would be to learn the pitch accent patterns for the dictionary forms of commonly used verbs. The verb to drink in Japanese, for example, is nomu. The verb to eat is taberu. If you say nomu or taberu, you're going to sound a bit weird. The way in which pitch accent interacts with this system of verb conjugations in Japanese is actually extremely complex, and I'd be very surprised if any non-native mastered the entire thing. But you might as well pluck the low-hanging fruit and let the rest of the system worry about itself for a while. Now we're going to move on to the secondary objectives that you should set yourself, in my opinion, if you're trying to improve your pitch accent. Secondary objective number 1 is to expand your understanding of how pitch accent interacts with the Japanese system of verb conjugations. For example, when you make the negative plain form of a verb, you'll hear that some verbs come down in one fashion or another before they get to the nai at the end, and some verbs stay high. So you get nomu, nomanai, nomanai, and nai is all low. But if you take, for example, the verb suru, to do, then the negative form is shinai, it doesn't come down. Iku, ikanai, kau, to buy, kawanai. I'm pretty confident that I still have a lot of errors here when I speak Japanese reasonably quickly in real time. Memorizing this stuff is one thing. Getting it to actually come out of your mouth correctly in real time is a separate problem, but then that's always true with any language. Secondary objective number 2 is to pay more attention to Japanese numbers. For example, if you take the counter satsu for a book or a magazine in Japanese, 30 books or magazines is going to be 30 satsu, whereas if you want to say 33, it's going to be 33 satsu. You can hear the 33, not 33. 33. This system is very complex. I don't know if there's a good explanation of how it works. The last time I was paying a lot of attention to Dogen's course, he himself acknowledged that this was a very tricky area and that he didn't have a complete understanding of it. I don't know where you have to go to find one. Secondary objective number 3 is to expand your understanding of the pitch accent patterns of two-character jukugo. So I'm talking about two-character words that are basically read with Chinese readings. Here you just need to gradually extend your understanding. It's also worth understanding that if you take two jukugo and stick them together to get a 4-character compound, the pattern often changes, nearly always. So the word kankei, which means connection or perhaps relation, is heiban. But if you want to say international relations, you say kokusai kankei. So the 4-character compound has a pitch accent of its own that overrides to some extent the individual pitch accents of the individual 2-character words. That one I picked up naturally through listening. When it was pointed out to me, I thought, oh yeah, I already knew that, but it won't always work like that for everybody. So try and put that one in your brain right now. The fourth and final secondary objective is to try and be a bit more accurate in terms of the way you use proper nouns. So for example, in the north of Japan, in Tohoku, there's a place, a prefecture called Aomori, but the full prefecture name is made by putting ken on the end of that. Now you might think, so what? But here's what happens. The place name Aomori is Nakadaka Aomori. You go up in the middle and you come back down. But when you add the ken to the end to say explicitly Aomori Prefecture, you have to say Aomori ken. So you stay high until the Aomori is finished and then you come down for the ken. This stuff is very subtle and complicated, but you can find online resources that will give you certainly the most obvious and important place names. How important is this stuff? To be honest, not that important, but that's why it's come in our list of secondary objectives and not in our list of main objectives, right? If you can make a substantial amount of progress with this stuff, then to be honest, you'll already be doing better than the vast majority of people who learn Japanese as a foreign language. How much further you go is up to you. Of course, there will be good resources available. Some of them will be in Japanese. Fine, nothing wrong with that. You'll have to root around. Of course, you also have resources like forvo.com, which is an online pronunciation dictionary where you can actually listen to natives pronouncing these words. I use that myself sometimes. Some of you are probably thinking to yourselves that you're just not going to be able to learn anything in Japanese if you have to think about all this stuff. In every language, there is going to be suprasegmental information that pertains to pitch or stress, accompanying every word in the language. If you learn Russian, you have to learn where the stresses are. The same thing is true in English, because both Russian and English have a lot of vowel reduction in them. If you're learning Spanish is more straightforward, but stress is not completely predictable, so you have to make an effort to learn it. If you're learning Chinese, you have to learn tones, which is a pretty serious challenge. So Japanese in that sense isn't that different to any other language. There's extra stuff you have to learn when you learn a word. Just got to get used to it. Nobody argues that you should study English for 2 years and then start learning stress. That would be crackers. And yes, I acknowledge that pitch accent in Japanese isn't as important as stress in English, but it's still important for various reasons, including the reasons that I've tried to make clear in this set of videos. So in my opinion, you should really spend some time thinking about it. That's it. That's the last video in this particular set. We'll have more in the future on other subjects. Hope you enjoyed these. Hope you found them useful. That's it from me today. Thanks very much and ciao ciao. Bye bye.